All right, welcome. So this video is about salary negotiation, how you can negotiate a higher salary and how I did in two separate occasions. So if you don't know me, my name is Agam Dewan. So I am a board certified psychiatrist, meaning that it's my job to diagnose and treat mental health conditions. So here is my story. So salary negotiation is something that I had never thought about. So in med school, I was there for 4 years, and I was pretty much just going broke, paying money for tuition, right? It is what it is. And then I was in residency for 4 years. And so in residency, salary is standardized per your individual program. It's already set by the program, it's set by the government. And so that's something that we have no power in negotiating. We are happy to be our positions as residents. The only time we get to negotiate is for after full-time full doctor jobs. And so speaking of, right, then I got my first big boy job interview. So for context, I was in my third year of residency and I was looking to moonlight. Moonlight basically means work extra. And so there you can get paid doctor money instead of resident money, which is 60K a year. It can often come out to $20 an hour or something. So it's nothing for being a doctor, right? And so this was with a community mental health job. Basically, they often have trouble recruiting doctors to stay with them. And so just community mental health, it can be tough situations. And so the pay is not as good oftentimes just because they're more underserved populations in government. And so they're always recruiting. And so they often hire residents to moonlight for them, right? And so what this community mental health needed was they needed someone to work on Thursday evenings from 5 to 8 p.m., essentially seeing some of their after hours patients. And so I knew that I was going to have my interview with the CEO, right? So before that, what I did was I read this book, Never Split the Difference. And so it's a book on negotiating. Basically, his story is that he was a FBI hostage negotiator. And so he talks about how he learned about negotiating through hostage situations, right? Like someone's been kidnapped or something, how he convinces the other person to, give up the kidnapped person. Or if there's a bank robbery, then how he convinces the bank robbers to come out and leave the hostages unarmed. So the couple of things that I got from that book, right, that helped me were, one, is that you want to focus on the other person's needs. It's not about you, it's about them. So it's about empathizing with the other person, understanding who they are, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, making sure that person feels heard and understood. That should be your motto in any negotiation. That's what I took away from it. And so he gives the situation, right? Hostage situations. It's not usually what happens in negotiations is a compromise, right? So it's if we have $100, I get 50, you get 50. But in hostage situations, you can't do that because you can't have 50% of the hostage. So the negotiators have to win 100%. The terrorists or the bad guys have to pretty much give up the hostage, and they have to want to do that. So that way they have to want to surrender. So that way the hostage is unarmed. So the main focus is building rapport rather than dominating the opponent. And so I remember he gave an example in the book where the kidnappers had taken on some hostage. They were in Vietnam or somewhere foreign, and they had captured this hostage. It was I think it was a traveling person on vacation. So they'd captured them for months. And over the course of months, the hostage negotiators slowly understood their point of view, where they were coming from, what they were fighting for, right? And from what I recall, they just ended up giving up the hostage without harming them. So, that's the outcome you want, right? But of course, these aren't hostage situations, so I don't think of them like that. And he gave two examples in the book that I felt were super relevant. So one was two ways to state something. So one was to say, would you be opposed? That's a phrase. And the nice thing about that phrase is it gives them the power to say no. So I remember explicitly when I used this phrase was when I had to get permission from my residency program director to moonlight. And I already had one moonlighting job and I wanted to get a second one. I went up to him when he was working and I said, hey, would you be opposed to chatting for 5 minutes? And so he said, no, of course not. Come in. And so because he said no, right? It kind of opens the door to further conversation. If people say yes, they often say it because they're forced to, but if they say no, it gives them some sense of power. That's what the author says. And then the second one is you say sounds like a lot, which is like a reflective statement. For example, if somebody tells you about like the bad day they had to work, they're like, oh yeah, my boss yelled at me and screamed and, they embarrassed me in front of their coworkers. And then you could say like, sounds like your boss had it out for you. And they're like, yeah, exactly. Right. That's a reflective statement. And it makes that other person feel like they are heard. So that these are two statements you can use in our negotiations. But so going back to what I did, right? So in my interview, I was really focused on their needs of the community mental health. And so what they told me was that they needed someone who, could see some extra patients that they had outside of the 9 to 5 environment. I couldn't work the 9 to 5. And so, they had some extra patients who would benefit from the help from an after hours kind of situation. Someone who fit their culture and their team. So they're a rural community mental health. So, like down to earth kind of people, right? Like blue collar, like it's a very different culture from the urban New York where I live currently. Right. So huge difference from that. So they needed someone who fit in with their culture. I lived in Michigan at the time. And so this was a Michigan rural area and being okay with serving an underserved population. So with the underserved population, they tend to have different needs, right? Money is an issue, tend to be on Medicaid, tend to be more complex psychiatrically and medically, and to have a lot of drug issues as well to, not medically literate. So there's more medication non-adherence and you might have to explain basic things to them. So it's a tough population to work with, and a lot of psychosocial stuff too, like homelessness and not being able to afford medications or not being able to attend appointments, that kind of thing. And someone who was interested in staying on in Michigan and may stay on with them full time because they want to recruit people who will stay with them in their mission long term, right? And so in my interview, I molded myself to meet their needs. So, I was definitely able to see patients outside of the 9 to 5, like the Thursday evening, right? Like I was very humble and understanding, down to earth. And so, I was able to try to create a great rapport with the CEO as well as the nurse and the scheduling assistant who I'd be working with after hours. Of course, I was okay with working with an underserved population. That's what I'd done in residency. I had some experience in med school with that too. And, at that time I had intentions or significant thoughts about staying in Michigan. So I certainly saw myself, staying with them longer term. And I mentioned that. And so I think this is the number one negotiating mistake that a lot of people make is they come in demanding a raise, like why they need it. For example, like saying that, I need a raise or I need a higher salary because I just had a baby or I got a new house or I've been working there for 2 years. I deserve this, right? And it's all about me. Whereas it should be about them, like how the person can help their employer further or the person they're collaborating with. Like how can they help the other person meet their mission? And so if you come in saying that, I noticed that you have this new project, maybe I could take lead on it, help you out. Or I noticed that people are dropping. Well, I can help cover that role that they're leaving in, right? Or, you ask them what their need is and they're saying that, hey, they really need someone to help out their social media team. And you're like, yeah, I can totally do that. I have some experience with this. And so now that you're offering value, they're more likely to give you a raise back rather than just, demanding it. Like this is something that I've seen with my VAs that I hire, like for video editing and stuff. Like the ones who really say like, they've helped me, they've shown to me that they're capable. And they ask for it, I'm way more willing to help them than if they don't or they're slacking off. And so going back to my example, right? The existing rate of the community mental health job was $140 per hour. And so I made sure to research that beforehand was because I looked at all the other different community mental healths. Like I interviewed at a couple. I also asked around different other doctors who were already moonlighting there, asked some established doctors too, looked online. And that's the standard that it was around $140 per hour. And so then they asked what salary I expected in my interview. And so with the CEO, so I first I communicated clearly like how I could help them, like what value I could give them. Like I didn't just say like I want like this much amount of money. I said, I know that you guys are having these needs and, you need someone to help after hours. You need someone who might fits well with the team, who want plans to stay long term in Michigan, right? And so I asked them all this, or I told them all this. And yeah, so establishing my value first. And then I let them know that, I did some research, figured out what the market's paying, what's common in the industry, right? And then, I asked for the $140 per hour, which was the same as which is the same as the established doctors. So that's the key, right? Like there were doctors working there also making $140 an hour, and they'd been working there for years. And I was like a newbie, a resident, not even an attending yet, asking for the same amount. But because I had communicated my value and I had, made sure I researched, and then I asked clearly and succinctly, they gave it to me. And so I had also asked exclusively for telehealth as well, too. So like that was part of my negotiation, was that I said, because the place was like an hour and a half away from me. And I was like, I want to do this telehealth. And so they worked with me to set up like a Zoom system where we could do it telehealth. And so actually, and funnily enough, during the interview, I forget how this came up, but I actually remember asking for more after the 140. So I asked for $150 an hour. And so she said that not even the other doctors were paid that much, like who were working though already. So she couldn't give me that, because then, I would be making more than the established doctors there. So basically, it doesn't hurt to ask for a little bit more than what you've been given. And so the second example of when I, was able to negotiate for a higher amount was when I was moonlighting for a prison. So I moonlight for a prison where I take care of like on-call psychiatric needs, basically like seclusions and restraints and psychiatric interviews and assessing people, that type of thing, right? And so the existing rate at that time, I got this job as a resident moonlighting. It's because some of the other residents in my program were doing this. And so basically the existing rate that I'd signed on to was $134 per hour, for any like needs that happened like after hours, like calls and seclusions and things, 300 base on weekdays, and 300 also for weekend calls as well. So basically we were on call on like weekday nights and weekend nights where they could call us, and we'd have to log on at specific time, as orchestrated by the state of Michigan, like 12 a.m. to renew restraints and things. So like a lot of attending doctors didn't want to do that, right? Like, because it sacrifices their nights and weekends and stuff. But as residents, we're money starved, so we're more willing to do it. But what was happening over the years is that people were dropping out due to the low pay, right? I know for like the average person, quote unquote, or like, the non-doctors, this might seem like a lot of money, but, as someone who's gone through medical school and residency, right, it's not really a lot of money as a full-fledged doctor they're offering, especially if you're covering nights and weekends, right? Like, especially like imagine like being on call on a Friday or Saturday night when your kids are having like soccer games and like, social events and like meeting up with the in-laws or whatever, right? Like a lot of people don't want to do that. And plus there was some dissatisfaction with the management, and there was also problems with the staff as well, especially the staff at the prison. So like, getting a lot of pushback and attitude from them. So point being is that people were dropping out. And so the prison was having trouble filling their call schedule with psychiatrists. And so here I saw an opportunity, right? I saw, okay, like they're having a need here. And, so this is a need that I can help fill. So I called my HR manager and I clarified their need and offered to fill that. And so basically their need was they needed people for the on-call, like make sure the on-call was covered. And every night a doctor had to be on call. And so, after assessing what their need was, right, people were dropping out. Nobody was signing up for shifts. The senior psychiatrist was signing up, but like he didn't want to do it either because he's older. He'd been there for a while. And so, what I said to them was, okay, I'm young, like, so why don't I'll manage the on-call schedule for you. So I'll make sure it's filled every month, and I'll assign other doctors to the schedule, right? Like I'll coordinate all that. I'll submit the schedule to HR. And I'll cover all the nights that are needed. So up to 50 nights a month. So, if any other doctor, if someone doesn't want to cover like the Saturday night, I'll cover it. If someone doesn't want to cover like that random Tuesday, I'll cover it. If someone doesn't want to cover the weekend, I'll cover it. So I said, I'll take the backup for anything. Or if any other doctor has any issues, or if let's say they don't get their phone on time or they don't answer or something comes up, then I'll take their shift. Like no questions asked. So I said that. But then, after saying, I can fill these needs, then I stated, what I felt like that would be worth, right? Because that's the key. Sometimes people like simp for their companies where they'll like offer just help them, help them, help them. And doctors are notoriously guilty about this because no one teaches us that you have to know what your worth is. Like people sign on for jobs that they're getting paid a fraction of what they're worth. But like this is very common, especially in academic medicine where you get paid like especially in a salary position where you're not getting paid what the market is. But like, these doctors don't know any better. So, because we've been in med school and residency, so it's still a significant jump, but it's not what they could be making. And then when they're in the position, they keep getting additional work thrown onto them and they don't know how to say no or to shut it down because they're not willing to walk away. And so because of that, doctors can get taken advantage of. Like you could be leaving your shift at 6 p.m. and then they'll say, "Oh, but there's another patient in the ER needs to be seen. Doctor, you have to see them," right? And like as doctors, our guilt can be managed and like used against us, especially as admin. Like, oh, you're supposed to help your doctor. You can be the one who can help the patient. But like your shift ended and you're not getting paid any extra to stay an hour or two later to help this patient out, right? And get the patient needs help, but at the same time, the doctor has to look out for themselves too. Anyway, long story short is that you have to be able to state what your worth is. And so I asked for a rate of $500 instead of the $300 for a base on weekday nights, and then $1,000 on weekdays, and then $180 per hour. So basically I would get paid $500 for any night that I was on a call, regardless, any weekday night, $1,000 for any weekend nights, right? And then any kind of work that I did during those, I'd get asked for $180 per hour. And so the HR manager asked me like, okay, so what if they came back and they refused my offer? Then I told her that like I would walk away. And so, I got that from The Art of the Deal, Trump's book, where he talks about, you have to know what your leaving price is basically. And if a price is too low, you have to be able to walk away. The person who's willing to walk away the most has the most power in the interaction, in the negotiation. That applies for relationships, romantic relationships, business relationships. And so, yeah, and I truly meant it. Like if they didn't come back with it, like I would have walked away. And so they took a month to deliberate this. And I was really surprised by that. I thought they would like tell me quickly, yes or no, but they took their whole month. And so, I was fine with that actually. And the other like psychiatrist, like who was currently managing it, was actually telling me to, asking me to fill up the schedule, right? Take on some days. And so I declined because I wanted to wait for the negotiators to come back, right? Because if I had taken some call days before waiting for the negotiators, then I would have lost the power that I had, right? Which is my power of walking away, because I would show that I still kind of need them, right? And so then the pressure builds up too, because they have to fill up the call days by the end of the month. And so at the very end of the month, the vice president called me. And so I was super warm with him, right? I empathized with him, with all the pressure that he was facing. Like they were having other issues too, right? Obviously as VP, like the on-call schedule was just one thing out of the many that he was dealing with. And so, I understood completely. And I said, hey, like I will take away all of this on-call schedule worries for you. And so like, that's what I focused on. Like, I can take that away. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to think about it. And then also focus that we were a team too. Like this was a team approach, and like we were going to do work together for the best of the company and for the best of the inmates who we had been assigned to take care of. Right. So I focused on those two things. And so he came back actually. And so he offered me $450 on the weekday. So instead of 500, offered me $750 on the weekends. So instead of the 1,000, but then also offered me $189 per hour instead of the $180 per hour, which I'd requested. And so, I accepted that because it's still up from the 300 on the weekday, 300 on the weekends, and the 134 an hour that I was getting before. So I accepted that offer at that time. So, these were the learning lessons that I learned from negotiating and like these two situations. So one is that you have to know the going price in your area. Like, for example, I forgot to say that in the previous thing, right, when I asked for the 180, so I looked around what all the different, other companies and stuff were charging in Michigan, what rates they were offering, what rates I could get in private insurance, like if I worked for an insurance company, or like, I worked for private practice but took insurance. And I was getting roughly like 180, somewhere 160 on the low end, somewhere like 220, 240 on the high, especially if I did like private insurance. Like if I took private insurance patients, I took Aetna insurance, I saw 2 an hour, I could make 480 an hour, like possible. But of course, that's like depending on how many patients you have. So there was a range. And so that's where I went with the 180. So, and then the same thing with the other institution where I knew that 140 was the going price. And so I focused on their needs on both of them, not what I wanted, but what they wanted and they needed. And so I focused on how I could fit myself like a puzzle piece to help out whatever their issue was, positioning myself to fit their needs. And I asked for my worth. Like this is what you have to be careful of. When it comes to like salary, there's that do or die moment, right? And this is critical because this literally will affect your life. It'll affect your months and years down the line. Like, let's say you want to ask for 180, but you pussy out and you ask for 160 and they say yes, right? Then you can't really go back and say, oh, wait a minute, I meant 180. And now you're making $20 less per hour just because you pussied out and didn't ask for 180 when you knew that's what you wanted truly, right? Because, if you ask with like tact and grace, right? And the worst they can do is say no, right? And like, you decide where to go from there. But even I remember feeling this. Like I remember when I first asked for the 140 per hour, like that's a big number at the time. And so I was like, holy fuck, like 140, but like you have to internalize that you are worth that amount. Like you are worth that much per hour. And then the same thing with the 180 and like the 1,000 per weekend. Like I told them I won $1,000 per weekend day. Like that's a lot. So you can't be shy about asking for your worth, obviously. And then this is where, obviously researching the going price comes in. Like, I wouldn't ask for like 10,000 because like they'd be like, what the fuck, like get out of here. But that's why you have to do your research beforehand and then know exactly like what you are worth and then be willing to ask for that. And then the last thing is be willing to walk away. So if you're not willing to walk away, then they have more power in the negotiation, right? Because let's say you ask for 180, but like, you aren't willing to walk away. And then they come back like something like super low ball, like 160 or something, or let's say like 140, right? And they don't accept it. Or they like give you an 180, but then they bring it down like in the later, right? Basically, if you're not willing to walk away, then it shows them that they have you, that they don't have to increase your rates. They don't have to listen to you. And, that you will stay with them because like, you need them feeding you money. So you're not going to make it far rather than someone who like negotiates boldly. They might get it, but then they might also not get it, in which case they are willing to walk away and go to a different company. So that's where like the best time to negotiate is when the company is having big needs or, you have some other job offers already lined up. So that way you can say, hey, this is what I'm getting offered elsewhere. Like I can and be willing and do execute on it if that comes. But yeah, hope that was helpful. And yeah, until next time.